So let me tell you about the day I sat in a conference room, watched my boss introduce another woman as the new lead on every single project I built from scratch, and I smiled. I clapped. I even said, "Welcome to the team." And I meant none of it, because by that point, I had already started making moves, quietly, carefully, and they had absolutely no idea. My name is Ashley, and this is the story of how they tried to erase me and how I made sure that backfired on every single one of them. Okay, so let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand what this job meant to me before you can understand how bad the betrayal actually was. I started at this marketing agency in Ohio when I was 24 years old, entry level, making almost nothing, sharing an apartment with two other girls because I could barely afford rent. I had a beat-up Honda Civic, a laptop I bought on a payment plan, and a whole lot of ambition that nobody had asked for yet. But I worked. I worked. Late nights, early mornings, weekends when everyone else was at brunch. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I genuinely loved what I did. I loved building campaigns. I loved the strategy. I loved watching something I created actually connect with people. And it paid off. Within 3 years, I went from assistant to senior account manager. I brought in two of the agency's biggest clients. Both of them came to us specifically because of relationships I'd built. I created a workflow system that the whole team still uses. I trained 4 people who all got promoted on my watch. I wasn't just an employee. I was the engine, and everybody knew it, including Greg. Greg was in his late 40s, the kind of guy who took credit in meetings and gave it back in private when he felt like it. He smiled a lot, said things like, "We couldn't do this without you, Ash," and "You're the backbone of this team." I believed him. I trusted him completely. That was my first mistake. Looking back, I can see the exact moment things started to shift. I just didn't recognize it for what it was at the time. It was a Tuesday in February. Greg called a team meeting and mentioned that the agency was going to be evolving its leadership structure. I didn't think much of it. Corporate people say stuff like that all the time, and it usually means nothing. But then I noticed I stopped getting copied on certain emails. Not all of them, just specific ones. The ones about strategy, the ones about budgets, the ones about where the company was headed. Then, a client I'd managed for 2 years, a big retail brand out of Chicago, got quietly reassigned. Greg told me it was about bandwidth. I was busy, he said. Was just trying to help me out. I said okay, I trusted him. Then I started getting left out of meetings. Not obviously, there was always an excuse. The meeting time changed, it was just a quick check-in. They forgot to send the calendar invite. Small things. Easy to explain away one at a time, but they kept happening. And I kept explaining them away because I didn't want to believe what was right in front of me. Then she showed up. Her name was Madison, 26 years old, fresh from an agency in Charlotte. She was bubbly and confident, and Greg introduced her to the whole office like she was some kind of prize he'd won. "Madison brings a fresh perspective," he said. "She's going to help us grow in some exciting new directions." I shook her hand, I showed her around, I answered every single question she had for 3 weeks straight, because nobody told me not to. I thought I was being a good team player. I was actually training my replacement. I didn't figure that out right away. It happened slowly, the way it always does when someone's trying not to let you see it coming. Madison started sitting in on my client calls. Greg said she was just getting up to speed. Madison started offering ideas in meetings, ideas that sounded a lot like things I'd already said. Greg called them fresh thinking. Madison got moved to the office next to Greg's. I got moved to a desk near the storage room. And still I told myself I was imagining it. Still I told myself I was being paranoid. Still I smiled and showed up and did my job like none of it was happening. Until the day I walked past Greg's office and heard him say my name. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. The door wasn't fully closed, but I heard enough. He was on the phone with someone. I think it was the agency's owner, a guy named Patrick who worked out of the main office in Columbus. And Greg said, clear as anything, "Ashley's great, but she's not where we need her to be anymore. Madison's the future of this team." I stood there in that hallway for probably 10 seconds. Then I walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and just stood over the sink for a minute. That was the moment I knew. Not suspected, knew. I'd be lying if I said I handled it well at first. I didn't. I went home that night and I completely fell apart. I'm talking ugly crying on my kitchen floor with my dog Biscuit just staring at me like he didn't know what to do. I called my mom and could barely get the words out. I called my best friend Kayla and she stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours. Because here's the thing people don't tell you about workplace betrayal. It doesn't just hurt professionally, it messes with your whole sense of reality. I started replaying every conversation I'd ever had with Greg and wondering what was real. Every compliment, every "we couldn't do this without you." Was any of it true? Or was I just useful until I wasn't? I started doubting myself in ways I never had before. Maybe I wasn't as good as I thought. Maybe I'd missed something. Maybe I was the problem. That's what betrayal does. It doesn't just make you angry, it makes you question your own mind. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed and run through scenarios at 2 in the morning. I'd go into work exhausted and have to pretend everything was fine. I lost 8 pounds in about 6 weeks because I was too anxious to eat properly. My mom kept asking me if I was okay, and I kept saying yes because I didn't want to worry her. For about a month, I genuinely considered just quitting. Quietly, no fuss, update the resume, start applying, and leave before they could push me out completely. That felt easier. That felt safer. But then something changed. I was sitting at my desk one afternoon, near the storage room, obviously, and I watched Madison walk out of a client meeting with Greg. She was laughing. Greg had his hand on her shoulder, and they walked right past me like I was furniture. And something in me just went cold. Not hot, cold, like a switch flipped. I thought, no, absolutely not. Not like this. They don't get to just slide me out of the picture I painted. Not without a fight. And the moment I thought that, I stopped grieving, and I started planning. The first thing I did was get quiet, really quiet. I stopped complaining to coworkers, I stopped asking questions, I stopped showing any reaction to anything that was happening. I went back to smiling, back to being helpful, back to acting like everything was completely normal. But behind that, I was moving. I started documenting everything, every email, every message, every meeting I was excluded from. I kept a private record with dates and details. I went back through months of correspondence and saved copies of everything that showed my contributions, my client relationships, my results. I saved emails where Greg had praised my work directly. I pulled together data on every account I'd managed and every dollar I'd brought in. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do with all of it yet, but I knew that information was power, and I was going to need every bit of power I could get. Then, I started quietly rebuilding my outside relationships. I reached out to former clients, just to check in, just to catch up. I reconnected with people I'd met at industry events over the years. I had coffee with a woman named Sandra, who ran her own boutique agency across town. I had lunch with a former colleague who is now doing brand work independently. I wasn't asking for anything yet. I was just reminding people I existed. And the whole time, I was working, actually working. Better than ever, honestly, because now I had something to prove. Not to Greg, to myself. About 2 months into my quiet planning phase, something landed in my lap that I hadn't expected. One of my longest clients, a family-owned home goods company based in Cleveland that I'd worked with for almost 4 years, reached out to me directly, not through the agency, to my personal email. The owner, a woman named Diane, said she'd heard some things about changes at the agency, and she wanted to know if I was still going to be her point of contact. I was careful with my response. I was professional, but I was also honest. I told her that things were shifting, and I wasn't entirely sure what my role was going to look like going forward. Diane said, "Well, wherever you go, we go. You're the reason we're still with that agency." I read that email about 6 times, and then I called Sandra. Sandra had been thinking about bringing on a partner, someone who could handle accounts, bring in clients, and help grow the business. We'd talked about it casually before, the kind of conversation you have over coffee where you say, "Wouldn't that be funny?" and then go back to your real life. This time, I came to the table with numbers, my track record, my client list, my contacts, my documentation of everything I'd built. We met 3 times over 2 weeks. We talked through the details. We got serious. And then I did something that felt terrifying and absolutely right at the same time. I signed a partnership agreement with Sandra's agency. I gave Greg and the agency my 2 weeks' notice on a Monday morning. I was calm. I was professional. I thanked them for the opportunity. I did not flip any tables. But before I handed in that notice, I had already had conversations with 4 of my key clients, and all 4 of them told me they were following me, including Diane. You want to know what Greg said when I resigned? He said he was surprised and that he hoped I'd reconsider. He said the agency valued me and there was definitely a future for me there. And I thought, there it is. The moment they realize what they had always comes right when they can no longer have it. I said, I appreciate that, Greg, but I've made my decision. And I walked out of that building for the last time with my box of stuff, got in my car, a much nicer car than that beat-up Honda, by the way, and I sat there for a second. And I laughed. Not a mean laugh, just a real one. Because I had walked in there 4 years ago with nothing, built something real, watched them try to take it from me, and walked out with more than I came with. That was 14 months ago. Sandra and I have grown the partnership significantly since then. 3 of my original clients are still with us. We've brought on 5 new ones. I'm doing the best work of my career because for the first time, I'm doing it in a place where nobody is trying to push me out. Nobody is introducing my replacement while I'm still in the room. Nobody is moving me to the desk by the storage room. I heard through the grapevine, because this industry is small and word travels, that after I left, 2 other team members resigned within a few months, and that big retail brand from Chicago, the one Greg reassigned from me to help with my bandwidth, they ended the contract with the agency entirely. I didn't celebrate when I heard that. I'm not telling you because I'm proud of their failure. I'm telling you because I want you to understand something important. When you remove the person who is actually holding things together, things fall apart. That's not revenge. That's just physics. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. I spent years making myself indispensable to people who were never going to protect me the way I protected them. I gave everything I had to a place that saw me as replaceable the moment a shinier option came along. And when it started happening, my first instinct was to doubt myself, to wonder if I was the problem. I was not the problem. And if you're watching this and recognize any part of this story, the exclusion, the slow erasure, the new hire that something feels off about, the boss who used to praise you and now barely looks at you, I want you to hear this clearly. Trust what you're seeing. Stop explaining it away. Start documenting. Start building. Start having quiet conversations with people outside your current situation. Don't blow up. Don't confront them before you're ready. Don't give them the satisfaction of watching you fall apart. Get quiet, get strategic, and then get out on your own terms with everything that was yours to begin with. They tried to replace me, and honestly, I'm grateful they did. Because the version of me that exists today, the business owner, the partner, the woman sitting here talking to you, she never would have existed if I'd stayed comfortable in that conference room, believing people who were smiling to my face and planning against me behind my back. They pushed me out, and I landed somewhere so much better. So yeah, they tried to replace me, and I took everything. If this story hit close to home, drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this right now, share it with them. Sometimes people just need to know they're not imagining things, they're not crazy, and they are not stuck. I'll see you in the next one.